Namaskar and welcome to this exciting show, Sattology Debunking Mythology. We have a very special guest and a great friend and a very scholarly person. And today we are going to talk about the debunking the mythology of stories. And let me tell you, these most of these stories, like things like the histories which are written in Purana and Vedic history, are real happenings, but they happened so long back. We sometimes take them very lightly. But when you read these stories, or the katha, we call it in Hindi, or we read, so when you read them, in the conversations is hidden a message. And that's what makes us a better person. So without delay, let us welcome Sri Raj Vedam.
Namaste to all the viewers. Thank you, Aditya ji. It's a pleasure to be on your show again.
It's my pleasure to have you here. It's an honor to have you here. So Raj Vedam ji, you have done so much extensive research on these topics, and you are now considered one of the best scholars America has on these topics. Why do you think that these stories have lost their relevance in this modern world?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So I think that is such a loaded question. There is a lot of things to say on that, but I think in a nutshell, what we can do is we can trace the evolution of Indian knowledge systems over time, over genres, and we can identify at a very broad level two categories. One, everybody knows this: the Shruti and the Smriti literature. Among the Shruti, we know the Vedas, Brahmanas, Upanishads, Aranyakas, and so on. And among the Smriti is that which is remembered. We know that the Vedangas, we know that all of the Puranas, the Kavyas, Nibandhas, all these other aspects of Indian knowledge systems have found expression. So for the longest time, Indians have been contributing to this body of knowledge with philosophical insights, with mathematical insights, astronomical insights, medical insights, and they've been contributing to this corpus of works. So if we trace the evolution of this knowledge system, we also know it impacted the world in various time frames. However, kind of a reversal happened when the British came to India, when the colonial powers and the British came to India, and also with the European cultures having invented the printing press and the rapid dissemination of information. It caused a kind of a reversal where although the European powers wanted to come and learn about Indian knowledge system, translate these works, take them back to their own cultures and so on, there grew a kind of scholarship that looked down upon the Indian knowledge systems for several reasons. One reason, obviously, is the colonial framework. Colonial framework came in along with the missionary framework. Both of them wanted to come and say that the world was not a very ancient world, the way the Puranas and the Indian texts maintained, but was only created in 4004 BC. And therefore, they could not believe any of the Purana chronologies. They could not believe any of these things. They said, this is all flights of fantasy. So when they wrote the history of India, they used the Purana chronology first to write the history. Then they turned around and said, all of that is unreliable. All of that Indian works are unreliable. And notably, several scholars who did this kind of thing, they were instrumental. Like one of them is Max Muller, who went around and said that Indian texts are not historical in the sense you cannot get enough of data out of that. And he rejected several findings of people with astronomy, ancient works. He said, no, none of this are reliable. Only this Vedanga Jyotisha, which is 1450 BCE. That's the only thing he accepted, said everything else is wrong. So this whole framework of looking at Indic works as mythology, as backward, as stagnant, as primitive, were all outcomes of the colonial thinking. The colonial scholars who came with a certain mindset for control, they first plumbed everything they could. They took whatever they could. After having digested that knowledge into their own frameworks, and having propagated those frameworks as a Western foundation of science, philosophy, and mathematics and all those things, they turned on and said Indian works are unreliable. So today we are left with a corpus of works which has progressively been demoted. The demotion started in my talk on ethnocide. Please do look up a talk of mine where I say how the British practiced ethnocide. One of the mechanisms of ethnocide was the suffocation of Sanskrit. When they brought about the English Education Act, Macaulay brought about the English Education Act, I think 1825. When they did that, they decided not to promote Sanskrit. They decided to suffocate Sanskrit by making sure that any funding is used only to publish English works and not Sanskrit works. So when that disconnection happened, people lost their roots. No longer could they connect to the ancient works. So they grew a class of elites who looked down upon the native language, their own languages, and their own systems, and they became the pseudo Westerners in a sense, sporting their mannerisms and so on. So when you asked, how did this happen? There are several causes that led to the discrediting their own inverted quotes of Indic sources and looking at Indic sources as stagnant or backward or primitive and these kind of thinkings. Very, very unfortunate, but that's where we are today.
No, great summary on what happened historically. And you also said the term mythology was also used in a very aggressive way in terms of rejecting, like blanket rejection,
Right,
just putting everything under the carpet, that everything is mythology is out.
right,
Now, if everything was a mythology, then why, in your own words, why did you select Jyotishang,
right,
astrology? So you could have, it's just like, having a pizza, removing the base and only eating the cheese.
right.
And
Yes, yes.
and
So, I think it is strange, but there is an unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in, where people have only skimmed off the knowledge systems and said the base does not exist. The base is mythical.
exactly. You remove, it's, I think Americans resonate with the pizza example that, you just remove the base. Now, coming back to the base, and we have seen that these attacks have become more prominent now in the name of even the terms like phobias, and I don't want to people understand very well where I'm coming from, but all kinds of phobias have been attached, and the biggest of them we already know begins with I, and become a tool of silencing the quest for knowledge, and this silencing of the tool for the quest of inquisitiveness, the human qualities of inquisitiveness and the quest for more knowledge is curtailed because now people are not able to find out their own roots. Very simple example is South America. I'll take, you know, if you go to Brazil, their ancestors are shown as Portuguese king and queen. And if you go to any museum, there is no prehistory before that. Just because Bolsonaro came and things have changed, but didn't happen before that. The entire Native American history is wiped out. Similarly, entire pre-Islamic history of Middle East is wiped out in the name of, again, a phobia. Now, so the natives have no rights over their own culture and about knowing about themselves. And this is creating individuals with no self-confidence, because self-confidence comes from your cultural backgrounds, your ideological build-up. But when you are put in the middle, like with a thread in the middle of the ceiling, then you will rotate like a fan. Human being is not supposed to rotate like a fan. Human being is supposed to be stable and thinking individual. So so what are the drawbacks of this blanket rejection under the name of mythology, sir?
Yes. So yes, that's again one more very loaded question. I'll give an analogy, and hopefully that will catch all of these things. For the longest time, the ancient Indians, the Rig Vedic and the Upanishadic literature, you find this the infinity prayer, Purnamida. It says from infinity, you take away infinity, you're left with infinity. So the concept of infinity was beautifully understood in ancient India, refined better and better, incorporated into mathematics, philosophy, and everything. Very, very nice. There came a time when people would say, look, I understand when you say 1 plus 1 equal to 2 and 1 plus 2 plus 2 equal to 4, but you're telling me that infinity plus 1 is also infinity. Your infinity doesn't behave like a number. I'm sorry, this is all rubbish. Your infinity does not exist. So they come and kill anybody who says infinity. And the reality is this actually happened. This happened in the Catholic Church when they had problems with the notion of infinity. Guido Bruno, he's a name that we should look up. Bruno came and said the universe is infinite in size. The stars are all distant suns, and the universe is infinite in size. And the church did not like his idea of infinity because God had created perfectly heavens and earth and everything, and the Genesis model and other such things. And so to the finite place, it cannot be an infinite place. So they attacked him and they burnt him. They burnt him just behind the present day Vatican. There is a fountain in Rome where you can go and see it even today. That is the place where they burnt Bruno for his belief that infinity is what it is. So here's the notion. Here are a people who have gone far beyond the limitations of finite mathematics, finite understandings to go to infinity. And here are a group of people who thousands of years later encountered them and they can't understand. How do you even initiate a dialogue when somebody is sitting over here and the person is coming in is arrogant and right at the base level? So the base level fellow, instead of having humility and saying, Guruji, I don't understand, please tell me. Or tell me what this infinity is all about, rather comes and says, your infinity is not a number, doesn't behave like a number, you don't deserve to live. So where is the meeting ground? Where is the meeting ground when people come from so widely disparate philosophies, and the person who is sitting over here with his limited systems, limited theology, limited philosophy, limited understandings, projects that to the world. His ignorance is projected to the world. And he says, the frog in the well attitude, this is all that there is to the world. Anything else you come and tell me is blasphemy, and you don't deserve to live. So this is the tragedy, Aditya ji. The same thing has come to Indian knowledge systems too. The meeting ground has become so widened. The deracinated people are so westernized now that the ignorance has been conflated to a worldview, tremendous worldview, that the people over here cannot even initiate a dialogue. The minute you start a dialogue, you are immediately pigeonholed as Hindutva, saffron, fascist, backward, primitive. There's an arsenal of weapons which people have used with words that are used to confine you over here and not talk about it. So where do we even initiate a dialogue? That is the question. So I use this analogy to answer your question, but I hope it communicates what I wanted to.
Surely it does communicate in a very powerful way. The one of the and your name is so beautiful, Raj Vedam, and it's king of Ved.
Oh,
Now,
goodness.
coming to the point of the last point that you made, the the academic institutions which are the basis for inquisitiveness, human inquisitiveness. And we are not here to demean any type of inquisitiveness. We are open to all questions. The academics today, they have become propagandists now. When they were supposed to inquire and promote, accentuate human scientific endeavor, open questioning, open reasoning, now they themselves have become a tool of suppression.
Right,
So the evolution of knowledge cannot take place, or
right,
learning from the past doesn't take place.
right,
The if you do not learn from the past, you cannot innovate for the future. Very
right.
simple. So where these academic institutions are lost today, what has happened to them?
Excellent question. Excellent question. I'm conducting a class right now for the Hindu University of America where I'm pointing out five frameworks that have been applied in the so called Indology. And the frameworks are the colonial framework, the Eurocentric framework, which brought about linguistics and other things, the missionary framework, the leftist academia of today, and finally the Marxist framework. These five frameworks are used to define the narrative on India. And I have argued that there is need for the emic. Emic means insider, the person who is inside the tradition. He has got a framework, and his framework is as relevant as these five frameworks which one is trying to push. And I'm saying there is need for the sixth framework, which is the insider framework of Indian history, philosophy, understanding. And like I said, very unfortunately, whenever this framework tries to come up, these weaponized words are lobbied at you so that you'll retreat into the bunker and not even come outside. So I question, a university education or academia is supposed to be open minded, like you said. It's not supposed to be gatekeeping. They are not gatekeepers preventing knowledge from coming, but they should be willing to get out there and engage when a new idea has come in their frameworks, in their areas. Engage is what an academic is supposed to do. Go out there and say your frameworks are wrong because of these, or your frameworks are right because of these are the assumptions that you used, and these are the assumptions you're not used, and all these kind of things. That is the job of an academic. And like you correctly point out, today we have academics, for example, from Rutgers University. I don't want to pick on them. There are a whole lot of universities out there, but who go out there in the streets with bullhorns and start screaming out anti-Hindu messages. This has brought down a noble profession like teaching right down to the streets, like common hooligans. And the esteem is completely gone, the shine is gone. So these people are acting more like thugs, trying to mainstream their Hindu phobia. And that's what we're seeing. Students are scared in classrooms. Students are scared to wear their identity. Even if their identity is as a Hindu, they are scared to wear their identity in these classrooms, in these universities in California, these so-called, any university that has got a department called South Asia. That is a code word. If they've got a department called South Asia, in those universities, Hinduism is taught. Hinduism is taught. Got South Asia departments, and that is the code word. If they got departments called South Asia, you can be 100% sure that these departments have a very hostile framework for the Hindu identity. So they don't allow that expression. Their professors go on the streets in protests and things of this nature. They form cabals and attack any kind of attempts by the emic media to correct the narratives in textbooks. They deliberately distort the narrative. They distort the discussion in addition. If the people, the concerned parents come and say the portrayal of Hinduism is wrong and these are the things we'd like to correct, they distort that narrative, saying that this is a class struggle. They're fighting against somebody, and they'll trot out several people who will come about an atrocity literature kind of narrative, and they won't allow the debate of these atrocity literatures in addition. So I think, like you said, it is very unfortunate, but the professors are there, academic departments are there that are indulging in this, and the reason is these are all heavily left dominated, and the left dominated academia also encourages Marxist kind of thinking, and they also are susceptible, not susceptible, very receptive to oil money. And many of these things are what give rise to the narratives you're seeing today.
So coming back to the old history and so the most well recorded documented history of the world is ancient history in Veda, Puran, Ramayana, Mahabharata. The eloquence of those literatures is simply has never been repeated again so far, and there has been a general attempt to brush them aside. But most of the modern literatures, including I would go as far as Shakespeare also, they do not touch the eloquence. May not be English, but do not touch the eloquence of such literatures at all. Like academically very poor in light. Now, That has nothing to do with the modern politics. Nothing. In fact, the humanity gains by discussing those topics on various aspects, with social, intellectual, academic, everything else. Then, by giving them a mythology tag and then putting them aside in the dustbin or on a wall where you can just decorate them for your house with some Devanagari scripts over there, it's a big disservice. Now, in the academic circles, when you bring those literatures, there is first there is a rejection, and then there is a demonization, and then there is phobiaization, whatever you call it. Now, this has been the norm, and I have so many students who are listening right now, and they will many of them are nodding their heads, and they understand where I'm coming from. And the problem is also with the people coming from those cultures, they do not represent their own culture very strongly. And I
True.
think that's what you are doing with the Hindu University of America, where you're training people, but these are you're training people from same backgrounds. The problem is that there is not enough people within our society who stand by those literatures and call them Sattology, not mythology. What is your
Yeah.
opinion on that, sir?
Yeah. Again, I will bring some examples to bring it out, but let me have a little prelude to that to set the stage. You took the name of Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, for example, used very descriptive, flowery language. For example, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, and so on and so forth. Can you imagine that language being used today in a generation when people want WhatsApp messages or bite-sized information, and they don't want to listen to this prose language? So it is a disservice we are doing to ourselves when we project the very precise communication demanded today because of attention spans, and we project it to the past. In the past, they used different ways of doing it. We know in India that when a narrative was done, it was never the narrative of, oh, there is the moon, there is the sun, let's add up this one, that one, let's do this, and so on. No, no, no. It was never like that. Rather, it was a weaving of stories. It is a weaving of stories, a weaving of narratives, the use of metaphors, and so on, used to communicate information, especially at a time when word was oral communication. If you had oral communication, you can't take a huge treatise like 1,000 pages and ask people to memorize that. Rather, it was terse. Everything was terse in very, very well designed chandas, pleasing to the ear kind of shlokas and other things. People would communicate very precise information in a certain measure, certain meters, certain so on and so forth. So that could be remembered. In doing so, you had to take license with the language. For example, if somebody wanted to say one, they might have used the word moon because there's only one moon. There's only one. If somebody wanted to say two, maybe they said Ashwini because Ashwinis are twins. So knowing the context, knowing the background, people understand that people use metaphors and ideas from the common ideas of India to communicate the information that they wanted. So this is what was done. Today, if we look at this with zero patience, because we are used to the WhatsApp generation, give me about 8 lines, eight words, no more, that kind of, or Twitter kind of messages, then we cannot take that and communicate. That is a problem. Let me give an example. We find a story in the Puranas that talks about an Ashura called Vrika. So Vrika was an Ashura who underwent a lot of penance, and Rudra came and he prayed for a boon, and he asked Rudra for the boon. Rudra said, all right, what do you want? And then Vrika said, if I place my hand on anybody's head, that person must die. And so Rudra thinks, all right, you prayed for me, I'll give you this bone. He gives him the bone. The minute he gives a bone, Vrika starts chasing Rudra because he wants to kill Rudra. He wants to put his hand on Rudra's head. And Rudra runs and runs and runs and so on. And eventually, a divine maiden comes over there. That divine maiden tries to tempt this fellow, this Ashura, And Ashura is very tempted. He wants to marry her. She says, "You're Ashura. What do you know about the science? What do you know about the arts? You know nothing. I don't want to marry you." He said, "No, no, even I can. I know the arts. I can dance." She said, "All right, I'll do a dance. If you follow my dance steps, then I'll marry you." So she goes around doing the dance steps. In the course of the dance, she touches her own head with her hand, and Ashura forgets and does that, and he dies. And that's the story. Now people look at it and say, "This is a silly amusement and a silly mythology of the past. What on earth does it contain?" Let's decode that. Vrika is another name for wolf. The wolf is a nocturnal animal. The wolf hunts at night and sleeps during the day. So when Vrika gets the boon from Rudra, Rudra is another word for sun. Agni, sun. Another word for sun is Rudra. So when he chases Rudra, it really means the nights are becoming longer and longer. It is talking about the 6 month Dakshinayana and the 6 month Uttarayana. What are these? These are the northward course of the sun for 6 months and the southern course of the sun for 6 months to the solstice point, summer solstice point, winter solstice point. When the sun reaches the southernmost point, that is when you have the longest night. It's winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. So it on the day of the winter solstice, that is when this divine maiden came and did that, and the Vrika killed himself. And when Vrika killed himself, Rudra was again able to grow, and so sun becomes more and more prominent. So in other words, that story had encoded the equinox ideas, the solstice ideas. That here's the winter solstice, summer solstice takes 6 months a journey when the nights become longer and longer. Nocturnal animals are more and more prominent and chasing the sun. And then he's killed, and then the sun grows bigger and bigger for longer and longer days. So just one example, a story showing that has encoded a deep metaphor. It's encoded astronomical wisdom. However, if we blindly take it as a story, we'll say there's a silly fantasy in the myth, but there is much more over here. So just as an example, Adityaji, that to show you about what we call mythology is really encoding knowledge. In this case, is an observational knowledge of the solstice information. So that certainly is not a myth. That's a reality, and reality is truth, and truth is Sattology.
So, very nicely put, the extraction of knowledge from a story. But at the same time, these characters are also real because people like Vyasa don't have time to write fiction.
Mhm.
They're serious people. I mean, they are not here to write a fiction novel. Shukdev Goswami is not writing a fictional account, and Narada is definitely not a press reporter.
Right,
So these are real people with a serious agenda.
right.
By sometimes when the Indologists, most of the Indologists nowadays,
Mhm,
they are fakeologists in many ways.
mhm,
I'm not talking about the Sanatan Dharma follower Indologists because they are also real people. But
mhm.
many of the Western Indologists, when they hear, so for an Indian, it is very easy to understand the extraction of the messages from a real happening, history,
Mhm.
mythology. But for a Western audience, when we extract a lesson from a story, that makes a story irrelevant because for them it's just it was then that's how they create fables.
Right,
Now fables is something which is just a motivational story to tell us, this is prevalent. This is not something which West has invented. Even in Mahabharata there are references.
right,
The story of the hyena, the wolf, and the
right,
rat, and the
right.
tiger killing a deer.
Mhm.
A very interesting story which Kanik tells to Dhritarashtra. So those fable stories are already there.
Right,
Now these are different because Vrikasur and Chitraketu, these are all the stories which is histories. It
right.
did happen, and it had a consequence also. But
Mhm,
these histories actually happened. Now, where do these Indologists fail? Is that they they take the lesson and they reject the story or
mhm,
the history. So
mhm.
what is your view on that, sir?
So it's an interesting proposition. So you're saying there are people who understand the story but reject the premise. So it is interesting that it doesn't even go to that. I have found that people who read the stories have not even attempted to go beyond the story level, and they're dismissing at the story level itself. I think the first step would be to understand the story is encoded a metaphor, to understand there is knowledge behind it. Try to understand what is the key to unlock that wisdom, because there's wisdom over there. If you have the key, you can unlock that wisdom. If you don't have the key, it becomes a ridiculous mythology. So, at the level of mythology, most of the things are being thrown away these days. So, I call it as a good first step if people are just able to unlock that wisdom. Then
Exactly.
the next step is, what do we do with this wisdom? When whether Vedavyasa has told us this one, what are we to make out of this wisdom? That's the next step, which calls for a higher level of consciousness. People are should be able to appreciate the higher wisdom and go there. So I'm not even going there. I'm not even going there. I'll give you one example, Aditya ji. Here's a story which people are ridiculed a lot. The story says the moon, Chandra, he married the 27 daughters of King Daksha. And right there, people were up in arms saying, what on earth is this? Is Chandra an anthropomorphic figure? Is he a man? And where is the quest of marrying 27 daughters of King Daksha? What does that even mean? Well, it turns out that if you look at the passage of the moon in the skies, in a 24-hour period, it covers about 13.3 degrees. In other words, what do I mean? Today at 8 o'clock at night, you see where is the moon. You'll find the moon is in a certain position in the sky. Tomorrow again at 8 o'clock, you look outside your window and see where is the moon. You'll find the drop behind, and it's dropped behind by about 13.3 degrees. Our ancient ancestors, they had observed this. They had observed that the moon is dropping back by 13 and one third degrees, and it takes 27 days to complete a cycle. So they made the story of the moon marrying the 27 daughters of King Daksha to represent the sidereal month. This is now the sidereal month. Now, the story also continues that these are nakshatras, by the way. These are 27 nakshatras. The moon visits one nakshatra each day. That is the meaning. So the story continues that the moon's father in law, Daksha, he heard that the moon is favoring one of his daughters more than the others, and there's Rohini. He heard that Chandra loves Rohini more than the others, and he's furious with the son in law. How can you not treat my daughters equally? So he goes and curses Chandra. You will fade and die because you've not done a good thing, other thing. And Chandra is super scared. He doesn't want to die. Runs out to Mahadeva. Please, I don't want to die. Give me a boon. And Mahadeva says, all right, you will not die. You will wax, and I cannot remove that curse, but you will wax, and you will become completely dead, and you'll again be reborn. So in this little story is hidden the fact that, of the waxing and waning of the moon, that it takes approximately 30 days to go from a full moon to a new moon and back to a full moon. This is called the sidereal month, the synodic month. The first one, where the moon returns to the same nakshatra, that is 27 days. The moon coming back to the same phase is a synodic month, and that takes 30 days. And our ancestors were perfectly aware of this phenomenon. And this is what gave rise to intellectual development of calendar systems, the yuga models, everything by the desire to reconcile. What are the things I said? The first story I said was the Uttarayana and Dakshinayana, 6-month northward course, 6-month southern course. So they knew the solar year. The solar year is exactly 365.24 days. They could measure that. Then they saw the sidereal month, then they saw the synodic month, and their desire to synchronize all these things gave rise to the yuga models. So enormous amounts of intellectual development was done, and communication of this information was through the medium of metaphors. Repeatedly, we see in the Indian context that from the palette of divinities, actors were chosen and woven into stories that will communicate morals, that will communicate wisdom, that will communicate a lot of other information. So at the first level, I'm saying, let us first unlock that wisdom. Once you have that wisdom, second, what do we do with that wisdom? That again, like I said, calls for a higher level of understanding, which most of us struggle with.
So very well explained, Raj Vedam ji. Now, another point which which we see regularly is called the politics of PhDs. So, if you are not a PhD from an American institution, so you cannot literally comment on anything Hindu also, in the Hindu literature also.
Mhm.
And that PhD involves following the pre-existing biases of that university system.
Right,
You have to take a you have to take a research mentorship under a person who actually thought everything as mythology.
right,
And even if you now want to give a pathology on it, but you cannot, because you have to follow the research guide.
right,
And you're stuck if you're taking funding from the university. If you
right.
do not, unless you have your own independent chair who's funding you, and
Hmm.
normally most of the Hindus don't have right now,
Hmm.
very few chairs we have on Hinduism,
Right,
then it's a vicious cycle.
right,
So the outcome is just still going to justify that it was a mythology.
right,
And this is a vicious cycle. And then if you're not a PhD, there's no PhD paper, then in any case it is a mythology.
right, right, right,
Forget
right,
about Vyasa, forget about Narada, forget about Asita, Devala, all these great rishis. We have.
right,
For us, they are scientists,
right,
but for
right.
them, it is someone they
Mythology.
never saw.
Right.
So it's a vicious cycle. How do we overcome it, or what
Very,
do we have to
very,
do?
very good question. So, incidentally, this issue is not there only for social sciences, but it is also there in the so-called hard sciences. Hard sciences meaning whether it's engineering or medicine and other areas. We find there is now. I'm not an anti-academic. I like to see myself as an academic too. There are some problems with the model that we have today, like you correctly pointed out. The academia today is set up in such a way that the evolutionary model is accepted over revolutionary model. What do I mean by that? If somebody comes and has a fantastic discovery that is very, very disruptive, that does not fit into any other old pattern, he writes a paper and sends it out to a journal, there are no reviewers out there who will understand what he has done. It does not fit into the pattern. So they are going to reject that work. Rather, if somebody comes and says, yes, I read what A did, I read what B did, I read what C did, and I did a little more addition to what they did. This is the evolutionary model. This can be reviewed easily. This can be reviewed easily and it can be accepted. So the model that we have in publishing today in the academic world to get credentials, like you talked about the need of credentialing of a person, credentialing is done through the licenses that we have, PhD from some big Ivy League university or otherwise, or you got a string of papers to your background. Those papers come because you fit in the system. You fit in the system and then you are credentialed. So what happens when somebody comes with a revolutionary paper? Forget it. It's not going to be published. Even in the hard sciences, where everything is subject to scrutiny, right? You don't have the qualified people to review your papers. The situation in the social works, the liberal arts, is much, much worse because there is no notion of measurement, no notion of, and I'm being facetious here, no notion of hard evidence and hard other such things. Everything flies by opinion. Everything flies by opinion. Somebody makes an opinion, and that opinion is repeated by several other people. It's a Goebbelsian propaganda, right? So eventually, that becomes a fact, and that becomes a fact, and you should not disobey that fact. That becomes an
Don't
unwritten
touch it.
law in several
Untouchable.
of the liberal arts kind of journals and academia. How dare you contest that man's view, which is well accepted all over the world by thousands of people? So the mechanism, the pramana they are saying is thousands of people are accepting this particular framework. Who are you to come and contest that framework?
Exactly.
So the same thing is turned around saying these people have got adhikara because they have studied the Sanskrit text. They had the sources. All these European scholars who came to India 1700s, 1800s, they collected the actual Sanskrit manuscripts, palm leaf from various villages, temples, and other things. They could do critical editions, and those manuscripts are not in your possession today. They are in Cambridge, they're in Oxford, and we are the ones who critically read that and made the critical edition. Who are you to come and tell us that your own things are different? You don't have the sources. You see, there's another version of that same battle that even though you are living the tradition, even though you have practiced this tradition, they'll say it's irrelevant because you're only one line among many other lines, and they
Correct.
have done the critical study of all these four sampradayas, and
Yeah.
they have written the critical edition. Therefore, they have the adhikara to your Sanskrit works. You are not worth it. So, this is another version of that. So credentialing is done not merely because of the papers you have, what you're bringing in, all those things. Also, this kind of thinking is there. You're not graduated from the university where they teach you this critical way of thinking. And this critical way of thinking, unfortunately, like I said, the Goebbelsian propaganda, it has been set by colonial ideologists who came with their own, like I said, 5 frameworks. And I started out. I said colonial framework, Eurocentric framework, missionary framework. These 3 frameworks dictated what the early colonialist studies like H. Wilson, like Max Muller, like so many others have done. And their works have now been eulogized. Those are the works upheld. Their frameworks are the ones imposed on you. So you can't even go and challenge these things today because you don't have the adhikara.
No,
And
Adi.
the minute you do that, remember the weaponizing I said, they'll weaponize you as a Hindutva, as a saffron, as a Nazi, as ideology. So it's a ridiculous situation we find ourselves. I ask one question. If you say these 5 frameworks are relevant, why wouldn't you accept the 6th framework, the emic framework, the person who is a practitioner in the tradition? Why is his framework any less than any of these things that you have said? I would say it's much more authentic than these 5 frameworks because he's living the tradition. He knows what it really means. However, they don't want the 6th framework to come up. That is the tragedy of what we are seeing.
Very tragic. I think it's the people who are that the tradition aspect is completely ignored, and the popular opinion. Like I can have a popular opinion which can be completely wrong,
Mhm.
but because it is spoken by 20 people, that's right. This is completely like this defies all the logic and independent reasoning.
Right.
Now, in the like I can tell you an example of Harvard University Hindu Studies Department, done
Mhm.
by Franklin Clooney.
Mhm.
And now that
Francis,
person,
Francis, Francis Clooney.
Francis
Yes.
Clooney, yeah,
Yes.
Francis X Clooney.
Mhm.
And now the most ridiculous paper on Ramanujacharya he wrote, most ridiculous. Like I will not even use it as a toilet paper, and he can hear it if he's live. Uh, Now Ramanujacharya represents Sri Sampradaya.
Mhm.
He's like Devta for us
Mhm.
because he's our guru. He's
Mhm.
the person who founded
Vaishnava
Tirupati Mandir,
traditionalists. Yes. Yes.
the guru. And a person like Francis Clooney, who has who is a Christian pastor, by the way,
Mhm.
he is teaching Ramanujacharya followers what does Ramanujacharya mean. Now, this person is not even 0.001% of any of the sincere disciples of Ramanujacharya. But just because he's a Harvard Dean of Hindu Studies. So why do Howard go and appoint a Christian pastor to teach Hinduism to Americans? I mean,
Point.
Americans should ask that question. The why we are funding that fake university who
Point.
is just here to demean the traditions of India.
Very true. Very true. I think by analogy, if we look at, I won't name the religion, but the other religion, when they have their chairs in various Western universities, these chairs are invariably endowments with oil money. So oil money can buy chairs in some of the biggest universities and put their person as an adhikara to teach that particular religion. This has unfortunately not happened in the Hindu tradition. Where is the adhikara? Do we have the money to put the chairs? And when people do collect money, they are driven by certain utterly bigoted narratives, like we saw the Tamil chair, Harvard Tamil chair, for example. Things of this nature, where they have internalized the wrong narratives and using that to propagate a chair over here. So I think the question is relevant. First, why do we want to give foreign universities adhikara? Why do we want to fund the foreign universities with chairs to study Hinduism or to propagate Hinduism? Why can't that money be used to build expertise in India? For example, $100 spent at Harvard will go maybe 10 times that level in India. So why can't we open much more scholarship in India, build Adhikara up there, and do the rest? Very relevant questions. But Aditya ji, you know what has happened in India. I talk about the frameworks. The Marxist framework is what we have been living under. The Marxists, first starting with Nehruvian socialism, starting from 1947. These first 3 frameworks was before independence. After 1947 was the Nehruvian framework, socialist framework, leading on from 71 onwards with the Marxist framework. These people have completely controlled every aspect of university life in India. Every aspect. Nurul Hassan he was on the minister under Indira Gandhi, 71, education and HRD minister. They opened so many leftist, socialist, and communist institutions where they completely edged out and moved out all the emic people. So today you're left with a whole bunch of communists and leftists running these organizations. So Adhikara is gone. So even if we say, instead of giving money to Harvard, I'll put the money into an Indian universities, you will not find the professors. You will not find the professors over there because everybody's been sidelined. And once you're sidelined, the ecosystem cannot support a Sanskrit scholar who is in poverty somewhere. He's going to tell his son, look, you become an engineer and you go abroad and make a living, which means the tradition is gone once again. You don't have the continuity of knowledge. So these 60, 70 years has been enormously bad for the Hindus, enormously bad. And there's nothing happening on the horizon to change it even today. So you asked a relevant question. Why should Harvard appoint a Christian chaplain as a dean of Hindu studies over here? I find it a ridiculous proposition. But these people would come and say, we have done the critical studies. We have got all the data. We have got these things. So we can give an academic, clinical understanding of Ramanujacharya's works, which is much better than anybody over there can do it. This will be their spiel. However, like I said, the real Sampradaya followers in Melkote or other places in India, they wouldn't have a chance. They wouldn't have a chance to come out there and say this is the Vaishnava tradition really, and this is what our Guruji has said, because they have no adhikara, no voice, no money, no fame, no standing. Who's going to listen? Other than the followers of the tradition, who is going to listen?
Yeah, if any of the from the Harvard University, if anyone is watching, I would like all of you to put a petition to Franklin, whatever his name is, this guy's name is, ex Clooney. Now we have to put a petition that if he is not from that, either he should take Diksha in the tradition and follow the procedures for the tradition, or he should not write anything related to any Indian saint. And once we put that petition, I think this kind of blanket, he doesn't have adhikar to write it, first of all. But if he wants to get the adhikar, he has to get trained in that adhikar, for that adhikar. So with that, we'll end this exciting show. A lot of points you raised, Raj Vedam ji, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. And thank you all for joining, all of you who are watching. I know you want the show to go on, but it's Kali Yuga. People's attention span is very less. We already had a very long show, more than 45 minutes. And so please, we'll come back with another edition of a similar Frank Talk on Sattology versus Mythology with Raj Vedam. Namaskar.
Thank you. Namaskar.